part 3 of lecture 2. In this part, I will discuss generating the research hypothesis. If your study includes two or more groups that you want to find a difference between them or a relationship between them, you should state a research hypothesis. The research hypothesis is unproven theory that need to be tested during your research study design. That means you will assume a finding and then you will test it and find if this is true or not. Like a research problem, it should be simple, clear, and specific, and it usually identifies the direction or the relationship between the groups. We have two types of research hypotheses. The first one called the null hypothesis or H0 or the hypothesis of no effect. In this type, we will assume that there is no significant difference between the two compared groups or there is no association between them. The second one called alternative or experimental hypothesis H1. In this type, we will assume a difference between them or there is a relationship between the two compared groups. Generally, we start with the null hypothesis, so we state that there is no significant difference between the compared groups, and then with our statistical analysis, we will find if our estimation is correct or not. If I want to change the previous research question into a research hypothesis, the question said that there is a difference between removable and fixed orthodontic appliances. In this case, the hypothesis can be stated like this. There is no significant difference in the effectiveness between removable and fixed orthodontic appliances. So this is a null hypothesis which stated that there is no significant difference between the two groups. In the study, we will find if there is really not difference or if there is a difference. So we either accept this null hypothesis or we will reject it later. The null hypothesis, as I said, it states or assumes that there is no difference between your two sets of data. So take into consideration like this. We have two sets of data and we assume that there is no significant difference between them. But sometimes you may find difference, like if you take an example or a sample from this part. But really this just happened by chance. It's not reflect the real situation. So we can still accept the null hypothesis, but there is a margin of error here. But if the two sets of data like this, in this case I cannot accept the null hypothesis. I will state the null hypothesis, but whenever I take my sample I will find a difference. So in this case the difference is not by chance, it's a real difference. So I should reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative hypothesis. However, in this case, we still have a margin of error in which we will find no significant difference, but this is not to reflect the reality. Testing our research hypothesis, we may find two types of errors. Type 1 error is called alpha level. The same example. If the null hypothesis is true and in reality there is no significant difference between the two groups, but our sample was taken from this part. So we will find a significant difference, but this is not true. So it's called false positive, or in this case we will reject the true null hypothesis. This is called type 1 error or alpha level. In type 2 error, there is a significant difference between the two sets of data, and we should reject the null hypothesis, but our sample was taken from this part. So we will not find a significant difference, but in reality, there is a significant difference, and this is called type 2 error when we will accept a false null hypothesis. That means the null hypothesis is false, but we accept it because we didn't find a significant difference. This is called beta level. Alpha level can be confined or reduced to 0.05 and beta level to 20% statistically. I will give you another example to make this easier. If we want to find the truth about the patient and we do our test, we have two options for the patient. Either the patient doesn't have the disease or the patient does have the disease. Our test either negative or positive. In case that the patient doesn't have the disease and we find negative results, this is a correct result. If the patient does have the disease and we find positive results, this is also correct results. But if the patient doesn't have the disease and we find positive results, this is false result, and this is called type 1 or false positive. That means it's positive, but it's not true because the patient doesn't have the disease. If the patient has the disease, and we find negative results, this is also false, and this is called type 2 error or false negative because we find negative results, but in reality the patient is positive. He has a disease.